Well, hello and welcome. I'm Bill Sherman, director of the Warburg Institute. And on behalf of my co-host, Greg Perry, the CEO of the Association for Art History, it's a pleasure to have you here at the latest in our long-running series of what we call curatorial conversations. The Warburg started doing these about 7 or 8 years ago. The AAH, it turns out, was also doing them. And very recently, we decided to join forces and do them all as one. And really, the idea is to speak to people from curatorial projects, from museum projects, from collections projects, and really get a kind of behind the scenes view of, in one way or another, major projects. Sometimes those projects are quite local and ephemeral, small temporary exhibitions. Sometimes they're bigger, like the rehang of a whole gallery. Sometimes, as in our last curatorial conversation a month or so back, they were about the opening of entire new collections or museums. This was the V&A East Storehouse with Gus Casely-Hayford. But this one probably counts as the longest in the making. I think even the V&A East Storehouse was about 13 years of work, and that's nothing compared to the 27 years that our speaker, Sir Jonathan Marsden, has been working on the catalogue that he will be talking about. Sir Jonathan, we're very happy to have here. Wikipedia describes as art historian, curator, and courtier, which is an interesting trio of roles, and clearly the ones you need during 2 decades of work at the Royal Collection. And Jonathan was, of course, deputy surveyor and then surveyor of the Queen's Works of Art, and then director of the Royal Collection itself as a whole. He's been very active. Those of you who have been around will know as a scholar and a governor in a wide range of institutions, serving, for instance, as a trustee of the Art Fund of City and Guilds Art School, historic royal palaces, historic England and English heritage, and also very active as an editor of furniture history. So delighted to have Jonathan here to talk about the massive catalog, some 27 years in the making, as I said, of European sculpture in the collection of His Majesty the King. You can see the 4 successive volume covers there in front of you. And just a few numbers as we get started: 1,300 entries, 1,800 works of art, and 2,500 color photographs. That number alone just fills me with admiration and respect, but also a sense of the extraordinary amount of work it involved. But Jonathan, before I hand over to you to just introduce the project, I wonder if, Greg, if you want to just say a few words of welcome on your own.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. Yes, and as Bill mentioned, we've been doing this collaboration for a few years now.
Yeah.
And it's really part of our curatorial initiative at the Association for Art History, where we work to promote and advocate for the value of curatorial work. And one way we do that is through issuing annual curatorial prizes for excellence in exhibitions and curatorial writing. We also have events that address topics of interest to curators, this curatorial conversation series being a good example. And then we also have opportunities for professional development and sharing of expertise among curators. And you can see on our website that we have resources on workplace well-being, on skills development, and on climate change for curators, if you're interested in looking into those topics for your work. So it's a very happy collaboration, and happy to be talking to Jonathan today.
Fantastic. So yeah, Jonathan, if you want to just talk us through a sneak preview of what I gather will be out, as you say here, in late September. So thank you very much for coming and talking a little bit about what you've done.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you very much for the invitation. And thank you, Greg, for the invitation from the Association for Art History. And thank you for fitting me into this excellent series. Well, what has up until this point been an excellent series. Having attended several of them, I know that, just as you said, many have got some kind of substantial artifact to present, a new museum or an exhibition or something like that. And I must confess that what I have tonight isn't quite so substantial. In fact, it doesn't yet exist. But this was a photograph that was taken on Monday, which appears to show a printing press and something significant happening on it. So we're that close in Pembrokeshire. This will be the latest installment of a series of catalogues that began over 100 years ago. We may find ourselves discussing later just how it should be that this is the first one after all that time to be dealing with sculpture. Taken as a whole, a higher proportion of the paintings and drawings in the Royal Collection have been treated in this way than some other parts. But the very first catalogues in this form, published for an admittedly narrower market in the early 1900s, actually covered armor, furniture, and porcelain. They were all written by the same man, Guy Laking. They were far from comprehensive, and certainly in the case of the furniture volume, downright selective, what we would actually call today highlights. Once the series began in earnest in about the 1930s, it was understood that a catalogue needed to be inclusive, and so cherry picking has been frowned upon ever since. It's not looked kindly upon. The cataloguer doesn't have the right to exclude anything from consideration on the basis of personal preference. So it's an almost unparalleled publishing achievement, I would say, for its extent and longevity. May seem, in fact, to belong to another era when the creation of catalogues like this was seen as a primary duty of the curator. What else were they doing? And their regular appearance was one of life's certainties, really. Now, the rate at which they have appeared has slowed down more recently, partly, I suppose, because the coverage is already quite good, but also partly because ever higher standards, both of scholarship, let us hope, and production, have helped to drive the costs of publication impossibly high. Also largely, I think, because what is expected of a curator and the complexities of modern life have changed so profoundly. Since, I would say, about the 1980s, the creation or compilation of catalogues like this has come to be seen as a retirement job. So one of the hazards of a long-term project like this is that the subject can seem inaccessible to other people during that period. And I began working on this, as Bill said, 27 years ago. I would have liked it to appear sooner. But I do share very much the thoughts of a great cataloguer, Bill Sherman, expressed in the short preface to his great catalogue of early Italian paintings, which you can see on the screen. It was commissioned in 1959 and appeared in 1983. Having apologized for the delay, he added, "As I look back, it seems to me to have been to everyone's advantage that my thoughts on these pictures in the early 1960s were never divulged." And however long it takes, however elaborately published, a catalogue like this, Sherman reminds us, is nothing but a temporary statement of opinion in movement. Now, 185 years ago this month, the 21-year-old Queen Victoria purchased, as she put it, from an Italian, 2 beautiful pieces of jewelry by Benvenuto Cellini. He had become a household name across Europe by this time, 1840. His remarkable autobiography appeared in more and more languages and editions, and the life it describes was freely adapted for the stage. In fact, Queen Victoria was no fan of Hector Berlioz's very long opera that had premiered 2 years earlier, describing it as one of the most unattractive and absurd operas I suppose anyone could ever have composed. But she was delighted with her jewelry, which of course had absolutely nothing to do with Cellini. And in the coming decades, Victoria would be called upon to lend to exhibitions such treasures as Cellini's sword hilt and the Cellini shield, neither of which were ever touched by his hand. At the Paris Universal Exhibition in 1855, she extended her supposed holdings of Cellini's work by purchasing this half-size reduction of Perseus cast by Clemente Papi. I mention all of this because of the fact that, completely unbeknown to the Queen or anyone around her, she actually did possess 2 bronze statuettes that I, at least, believe most certainly were touched by the hand of Cellini. Such things are extremely rare and can be counted on the fingers of 2.5 or 1.5 hands, depending on how you look at it. No one knows how they entered the Royal Collection, and it was only in 2003 that the one you see on the right became widely known at all. From that time, it's been possible to visualize and understand properly the scheme that Cellini intended for the Porte Dorée at Fontainebleau, supporting the nymph, that great relief, the only piece of the scheme that was cast at full size. So what you see there are the two little reductions with the full-size nymph in the Louvre. The only trace these objects seem to have left in the documentary record is this notice in an inventory of 1826 at Carlton House: 2 bronze fawn basso relievos, 22 inches. In the 1875 inventory of bronzes at Windsor, we can find the platter that is now in the Getty Museum, but there's no trace in any of these records of the one that still remains in the Royal Collection. Now, why am I telling you all this? Perhaps on one level, it's simply a naked advertisement, a commercial for the benefits of proper catalogues. After all, the late Anthony Radcliffe of the V&A reminded me, when I told him about these Cellini bronzes, all my best discoveries in my whole career I made in the stores of the museum. But it also serves as an introduction to the history of cataloguing sculpture in the Royal Collection and the impressive but variable nature of the documentary record. I referred there to cataloguing sculpture. Let's take another look at that 1826 inventory. Here's another extract, which I'm going to make a bit easier for you to read. We have 2 equestrian statues, both in the same room, both made of silver. And actually here they are. On the left you have Charles I, and on the right, Gustavus Adolphus. Well, as the great European art museums went about their work from the mid-19th century, it became administratively necessary to make categoric divisions between types of object that would have mystified Cellini. Is this metalwork, or is it sculpture? That's not a question that would have occurred to him. Here they are, again side by side, in the inventory at Windsor in 1875. More confusing still, this is the inventory of bronzes. They're both made of silver. On the right of that shot, you can see some instructions which have to do with where these objects should be placed on King George V's writing desk when he's in residence at Windsor. In modern times, they fall on 2 different sides of the divide. Charles I, you will see in the forthcoming catalogue of sculpture, but Gustavus Adolphus has already been expertly published by Catherine Jones in the catalogue of European silver that appeared a few years ago. Also there, you will find this magnificent cup and cover of about 1700, just about as carved an object as you're likely to find. But again, brilliantly catalogued by Catherine. It was, after all, supplied by George IV's goldsmith, who took the trouble, one might regret now, to add a band of jeweled decoration to the original object. I make no apologies for the fact that rather later on in the forthcoming catalogue of sculpture, you will find these blatantly argentitious objects by that latter-day Cellini, Alfred Gilbert, alongside what might not so contentiously be termed his works of sculpture. So if we revert for a moment to the real Cellini, it might just be worth repeating these vital statistics that Bill touched on. It's actually, as you said, 2,500, I think. 27 years, and there is a picture there, if you look hard enough, that tells its own story on that subject. Unlike the paintings catalogues, this one of sculpture doesn't really use the concept of schools. Sculpture has always been a pretty international activity, and here is a rough idea of what it would look like if we had done it that way. As well as being international, sculpture is an all-encompassing thing, and one of the things we had to do right at the start is to come up with some definitions. So what is in and what is out? Now, that's worked out pretty well, but of course, when you're thinking about the impact that the art of sculpture played in the royal palaces through time, you come across someone like Grinling Gibbons, and the apartments at Windsor owe an enormous amount of their impact, even today when it's very diminished, to his work. But these decorations are not in the catalogue. Outside in the quadrangle, his statue of Charles II is in the catalogue, made at pretty much the same time. As to materials, it breaks down like this. So bronze is the biggest, then 500 marbles, 220 plasters, 108 waxes, 67 ivories, 31 terracottas, and there's a rump of about 200 objects in stone, wood, iron, lead, silver, other things. So the Royal Collection is just not like any other. That's a commonplace. It's not even, however, like other royal sculpture collections. Here's a proposal for what I suppose we would now call display storage of the great French Royal Collection of bronzes, to be kept all in a lovely row at the Garde Meuble, a cataloguer's dream. And here is a room that actually is in a royal palace, in the Royal Palace in Stockholm, a gallery that became a public museum. Although something like this organization did exist in the time of Charles I at Whitehall, there's been nothing like it since. And the more normal disposition of sculpture in the palaces is like this. The Green Drawing Room at Windsor. As you look at it, it gradually dawns on you that this room is stuffed with sensational bronze sculpture, which take their place alongside art of many other kinds and very important residence. It's an inhabited collection, a kind of habitat. The Grand Corridor nearby at Windsor, part of George IV's additions to the castle, whereas perhaps the closest we get to an art gallery in a royal palace. And of course, we find sculpture also in gardens. Here is Osborne, the previous slide was Windsor. When we look at the typical page from our catalogue, it must be remembered that these objects have never met one another. They are brought together only on the printed page. And the fact that the collection is so widely dispersed, along with its size, undoubtedly dictated how the task could be approached. All along, I've used the word compiler rather than author, because although I have examined every object in the catalogue, I've also made use of resources accumulated over several decades by my predecessors, starting with a set of index cards. These are more or less complete, and over time, colleagues have written information that has accumulated from archives, from physical examination, and this is Quasimodo's bust of Marshal Vauban. An object like this would have its own dossier, or we call them object files or subject files. That accounts for a small proportion of what's in the catalogue. Over the time I've been working on it, I've had the great benefit of collaborating with some brilliant colleagues in other institutions, several of whom have just produced these rather exhaustive guidelines, particularly for bronze sculpture. I've been lucky enough to actually examine bronze sculpture with David Bugari, Jane Bassett, Francesca Bava, Peter Mature, and it's the gold standard. The only thing about it is that it works a lot better for this sort of collection, where there's a small number of objects all in one place. So the approach I have taken could best be termed opportunistic rather than systematic, taking advantage of occasions when either I or the objects could be in a particular place. And rather than saying I'll spend 2 years doing physical examination, 2 years doing archival research, much more typically, I've been doing a bit of both in the same day. Of course, closely related to physical examination is the assessment of condition, which is another aspect of the project that could form the subject of a separate conversation. I'm going to speak next about photography, and it should be assumed that every photograph in the book has been taken following at least an assessment of condition, in a great many cases, some sort of preparatory treatment, so that the object is, as they say, ready for its close-up. So the name on the cover is one of a great number that should be there, but there really isn't room. So to end with a few words about photography, working all my life in sculpture and the decorative arts, I've always been very aware, if you say to a photographer, please photograph that painting, they'll say, yep, when do you want it? If you say, please photograph this vase or this bust, they say, yep, how do you want it? So I don't think many people really appreciate that when you take a photograph of an object like this, a beautiful photograph like that, it actually involves that. Or this one, Prince Albert, even more elaborately. And those two objects, by the way, are 500 miles apart in different countries. So that's a sort of snapshot of how complicated this is. So everything in the catalogue is illustrated. And there's some quite well-established conventions for photographing sculpture. In the ancient world, of course, this is how you do it. It's like almost like a police photograph. It works well with some modern collections. This is the British Museum down the road with a modern sculpture, similar convention, but it's a very small collection. You cannot do this with 500 busts. So the photography, which is mostly undertaken by Ian Lewis, necessarily leans towards the documentary. And Ian has had to work towards quite a restrictive brief. There's not a lot of room. This is one of his beautiful photographs of Canova's Marsden Venus, but there's not a lot of room for this kind of thing. However, or indeed, the photograph on the right is in the book. This one isn't, but you can see what an advance it is on the other one, but you cannot do that with 1,800 objects. But the big plus is that you can see these detail photographs online. I'm very much hoping that people will use this book in conjunction with the Royal Collection website, where that is a particular asset. You can see really a lot of photographs of the object described. And so you won't see every signature on the back of these busts by Nollekins illustrated in the book, but if you're that much of a nerd as I am, you can go online and find that signature illustrated. Well, it seems like quite a nice place to leave things for now, because it introduces a topic I'm sure we'll get onto, which is the relationship between print and digital catalogues. What I hope with this project is we've ended up with something like the best of both worlds. And before we go, I'm hoping that we can leave this up at the end of our time together. There's a special offer for everybody who's on the call. About 4 lines down, there's a very special code, which you might have time to write down or something like that. But for the time being, I'm going to, I think I'm going to stop sharing and go back to you, Bill.
Well, that's fantastic. Absolutely brilliant, Jonathan. You've given us such a great glimpse of it. And yes, let's make sure we put that code back up before we go at the end in case people didn't get it now. So for those of you who don't know our format, we usually have just a bit of a conversation between the 3 of us, and then there will be a bit of time for you in the audience to offer some questions or comments to us. Please do so by entering it in the chat, and I will read it and share it with Jonathan, and we can do. But let me just get started, Jonathan. You covered so much ground, but in a way, perhaps the very simplest question, maybe the first one, is, whose idea was it to do the catalog in the first place?
I suppose, rather, as I said at the beginning, it's a sort of never-ending project that has been going on all this time, and somebody must have noticed that there's never been a sculpture catalogue.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons, I think, is, without wanting to sound like an apologist, is marble busts are not regarded sufficiently as works of art. And so you go to a castle, you go to an institution, there is a room full of marble busts, which I think perfectly naturally to most people, simply serves to tell you you're in an institution. It's got
Right.
busts.
Right.
You're definitely not there to look at art.
Yeah.
So, I think this problem of how to treat them as works of art might have been behind it, but also over the years, it has been typical for, I've noticed this, the catalogues of British material to be handled by in-house curators, and the catalogues of foreign material have tended to be handed to outside contributors. That may be a coincidence, but that's perhaps another reason.
Yeah, so interesting. I guess the other immediate starting question would be not about who decided to author it, but who is it for? Who are the readers of such a catalog? Because obviously most of us, unlike, let's say, a catalog of a public museum, most of us will never have the opportunity to see these objects in situ. So it's not really a finding aid, presumably. Um, what is your sense of the readership and purpose for these volumes?
Well, it's very kind of you to use the word reader. I'm not sure there are too many of those. But in terms of, I mean, it's a work of reference. This is a glorified list, and it's getting this part of the collection into the public domain fully from a position where it's been very partially out there. I say partially. I mean, there's a lot of this material is already online.
Yeah.
And we've probably discussed this in the past, that the degree to which it is physically acceptable is actually surprisingly high, despite perhaps the presumption that it would be lower. So the reader is probably a specialist, but it's a starting point. It's a point from which it's a list from which to take material for further study. So that is the readership, if you like. And I don't expect for 1 minute that anyone will try and get through the whole thing.
Yep. Is there a hope, at least, of a royal reader?
Very much so, absolutely.
Yeah. Is it engaged with by the current and future possessors of these things? Interesting.
Yes.
Interesting. Good. Well, we'll leave it there. Greg, did you want to jump in?
Or Jonathan, might as well just touch on something that you ended with, which is the decision about what goes online and what goes in a print catalog, and what precipitated the decision to do something in hard copy. Was it because it's part of this long-running series, or yeah, I mean, what went into that decision? And then maybe if you could talk about talk about a little bit more what's online versus what's in the actual books.
Well, I don't think it's any longer a straightforward print or digital decision. It depends what the material is. I think some things now, it's fairly mad. I mean, I'm sorry if there's anybody on the call who's a specialist in very large tapestries, but if you've got, let us say, a collection of very large tapestries, printing them in a book at 4 inches square illustration, when you could be looking at the real thing, architectural drawings, maps, historical maps, things that lend themselves to digital. So it's not a question of print or digital in an absolute decision. It's what the material is, and what is the best way of examining it. Now, I have had colleagues, and I shall definitely not name them, who would say it's actually preferable to look online at an old master drawing than to look at the old master drawing, because you do see more. So, it's fantastic, and we should all be making use of both. Now, on the question of print, of course, any author wants a book, not a URL or a bit of code. And it is true to say that in the course of my work, I have referred to digital resources that are no longer available. And that is problematic bibliographically speaking, as we all know. Yes. But a book has this effect of concentrating minds. And I do mean, if we hark back to that photograph of all the people who've been involved here, if you've got a deadline, and it is both very difficult to achieve and extremely expensive, which is another topic we might get onto, those people are more focused on the task. Because if you're going to get that done at that date, all of you, If it's online only, you can fiddle about later on. It doesn't matter if it's not all done. So that's another reason in my mind that a physical result, like an exhibition, like a building project, a physical outcome concentrates minds in a really powerful way. And not least because everybody knows they've got one shot at it. It's incredibly expensive. Let's get it right.
Yeah, it's so interesting.
I'm saying that it's probably full of mistakes. It is full of mistakes, as we all know.
Well, everything is, but including digital resources. But yeah, but I mean, just jumping in and following up on that. You put it beautifully, I think, earlier when you talked about this sort of thing as being one of life's certainties for curators, for people responsible for collections, keepers, especially if you're a keeper or a director of a collection. And I remember very well during my short time at the V&A, it coincided with really that crisis moment in museum publishing, where the imprint of an institution like the V&A, or at the same time British Museum, as it happens, was no longer a given, and where the idea of doing a catalogue, even of a national collection or indeed a royal collection, was no longer a given. It had to be justified. And in some cases, it was a losing argument. And I wonder if you, in some almost 30 years of work on this project, if you could reflect a little bit on what that actually means. What does it mean in the curatorial world if this is no longer one? I mean, we've lost lots of life certainties in recent years, but this is quite a powerful one for those of us who care about objects.
Yeah, I mean, I again, I wouldn't want to put this as an argument about whether curators should do cataloging or anything else, because the conflict that I had in my working life was between cataloging and a lot of other really worthwhile stuff.
Yeah.
And some not worthwhile stuff, but it wasn't that cataloging I was being prevented. And if you ask me, I would have said 90% of this book has been done in the last, whatever it is, 5 or 6 years, 10% in the previous 22. But I wasn't detached from it by having to do worthless stuff. We were doing exhibitions, we were doing projects of online, we were doing things that were equally communicative. But I would say that this sort of cataloging work is the bedrock. It's the starting point on which you build. And it's then at the service of all the other channels and material and media. But as Sherman says, it is a temporary statement of opinion. And every 20 years, every 30 years, it's going to be way out of date.
Yeah.
And so you cannot keep going back to a catalogue that was published, that long ago and use that as your foundation, because you can go in many wrong directions on that basis.
Yeah. Jonathan, curators are starved now for research time. They probably had more in years past. You're citing the nature of the change in the posts, since the 1980s. And but at the same time, you said it's a bedrock, and if the focus more now maybe on audiences less than it was 40 years ago, still this is something that you need to reach out to audiences and sort of impart crucial information. Do you have any advice for curators now when they're trying to make the case to beef up what they have on their catalog, whether it's just online or in a book, to get more information about the collections themselves when there's probably more competition for their time, maybe on other things than there might have been in the past?
Well, I can put it no more simply than this. What is a curator? Let's get really fundamental. 2 things I would say. First, you have to be the unbelievably most learned and passionate and brilliant person on the subject you're dealing with. Absolutely useless without the other one, which is that you've got to be able to communicate all of that to other people with that passion and clarity and authority. So you can't have one without the other. The 2 things are indissoluble. Of course, was talking with somebody earlier today about the difference between a catalogue you've taken all this time over and putting something online. And it can be that what's online is far more certain. The internet likes facts. It mainly likes images, but it wants facts. Date, artist, you know. And the more I work on this, the less of that information I can give you with certainty. The catalogue has things like unknown man, unknown maker, whereas wasn't it always by so-and-so? No longer. We can't be sure anymore. So you can find yourselves going backwards from the certainties. And it is therefore quite challenging to someone who is therefore charged to put that online, to say, well, what am I putting there? Who is it by? I can't go on with all the 6 pages of discussion that you've come up with. So that is challenging. But I would say try and make the case in those terms. And you can't be a curator unless you do this. Really, that's what I would say. Unless you can master, you can really know what you're dealing with, but also be able to communicate the essence of it passionately to your audience.
I think some in our audience, what goes along with those decisions of what the priorities are is how you pay for them. I think maybe some in our audience might be interested in how this was. Was it core funding from the Royal Collections? Did grants have to be secured for the project?
Well, a very good question, and these are notoriously expensive things to do. And Bill, we were looking earlier at one of the latest volumes of the Castellanos series, which is now what, 30 something volumes,
something like that.
And there is an unbelievably wonderful man who called Michael Bishop who helps with those. Now,
exactly.
About whenever the dreaded pandemic occurred 5 years ago, everything changed for Royal Collection Trust, which is a charity whose only income comes from visitors to the palaces. There is no government funding there for day-to-day operations or anything really. So this was a moment when of extreme challenge, very high standing costs, no income at all. And a book project like this was an obvious thing to discontinue. At which point we sort of sat down and said, well, what about a plan B? And so the book is being published by Modern Art Press, also a charity, in conjunction with the Royal Collection Trust. And I have to say 2 individuals have stepped forward to pick up the enormous cost. If you can remember my slide, the book costs £350, or tonight only 280. But the cost price isn't 350. The cost price is 700.
Gosh.
Each book costs twice what it sells for to make. So without those 2 people, and you can kind of do the maths and work out how much they've put up. So but the good news is that these people do exist, and they exist. And I know in Michael Bishop's case, he would not mind me saying that he wants to be remembered for helping something excellent, and that is a physical thing. So those 2 things are encouraging to the cataloguer of a print book, because you've got an object and you can produce it beautifully, and it's an okay sort of pitch. But this sort of publishing is totally impossible without extraordinary philanthropy, and don't even start. It's a prerequisite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. One more, Bill, before heading back to you. I was really interested in your citing John Sherman there about how his views had changed over the years, and I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how your views may have changed, or your own scholarship, and then also maybe reflecting more broadly, because certainly art history has changed since 1998. And how has that impacted the way you looked at these things, or the questions that you asked as the project evolved?
There's a lot in that question, Greg.
Sorry.
So, And one thing I can say, I'm so pleased that no one ever saw what I started writing in 1998, Juvenilia. And of course, one of the problems with a long-term book is even when I felt I was getting, sort of okay at it in about 2005 or something, you're still having to edit that in 2025. And none of us is happy with something you wrote 10 years earlier. So there's almost a continuous churn. And of course, things come out. And during the, 8 years I was director, I wasn't able to take account of anything in modern scholarship coming out. So, it may be that this sort of dark age of citations from 2010 to 18. But more seriously, I suppose, there are certain categories of object which we have all learned to look at differently over the last few years. I would cite things like the bronze bust by Charles Cordier, one of which is on the front of the third volume. And so, yes, one sort of tried to take account of the new ways that are being taught of how to look at these objects. But with that, it's not a book that I think you would, I hope, say was absolutely of its time, because none of them is. And it's a reference book, and so you won't find any particular current sort of contemporary thinking embodied in it. I hope, well, perhaps, of course, you will, but not to any great extent. But yes, think there are certain objects where one's had to think again and again about how best to present them. But I wouldn't claim that it is riding a sort of wave of art historical conventions. Sort of, it's not at the front of them anyway.
I guess, the kind of follow on from that, just to put it a little bit more sharply, and
yeah, please do.
And more recently, it is, I suppose alongside COVID, what happened in the last 5 years or so is a lot of pressure on provenance and on national collections and on the source of how certain people get to have certain things. And I just wonder, Jonathan, if that's been a factor at all in the Royal Collection, but specifically in your work, because you've really straddled the period where that kind of wasn't as much an issue into one where it's very much on people's minds.
One cannot ever say that you're in any way sort of immune from these things, even though a great quantity of what's in this book came into the Royal Collection before 1900. That doesn't mean to say it came in under particularly glorious circumstances. Can I share my screen again?
Yeah, I think you should be able to.
Yeah, I'm just going to do that.
Yeah.
If I'm sorry, everybody, but I don't know if this is now going backwards or forwards. Maybe I'm overstepping my...
No, it's fine. At the moment, you're just showing the first.
Yes, this is my slight worry. I had an image of the the three great bronze busts by Leone,
yeah,
which were spoils of war.
Yeah.
And I've given a talk about them as trophies, because what they look like is the trophies in Mantegna's Triumph of Caesar, with the people carrying them off the battlefield. Huh. Charles V, Philip II, and the Duke of Alba most certainly never intended them to look like that. But if you were physically carrying them off a battlefield, as happened in, I think, 1812 or 13, then that is what literally happened to them. And they ended up in the castle of the winning team at Windsor. So, provenance, you can talk about it over a longer perspective. There's another object at Osborne, which has what I would call almost a swashbuckling history, in that it was commissioned by Napoleon for his brother, the King of Naples, sent by sea and captured by the Royal Navy on the high seas. It was then sort of auctioned in Gibraltar, sent back to the Isle of Wight. I mean, these things have been through the most remarkable.
Yeah.
Going further back in Charles I's possession, an object seized from the Kunstkammer of Munich in 1632, and carried across Europe in a sort of wagon train. So not the sort of thing that a lot of museums have to deal with, but it's the same thing.
Yeah, but you know what? Having said that, I think what I was really struck by in reading the draft of your introduction, or the preview of your introduction, which itself is quite substantial, I was really struck by how much direct commissioning there was, and in this case, much less sense of taking things from other people than being patrons, commissioners, and active collectors of things by specific figures in the history of the royal family. And I thought some of those stories were very, very important.
Yes, it comes to the fore in the post-Albert period of Queen Victoria's reign.
Yeah.
Two of them had a really different attitude to sculpture. It was very important for both of them. For Prince Albert, it was about what he called the incorporation of the idea. So making an idea into 3 dimensions. And he practiced the art of sculpture as he did so many others himself. With Queen Victoria, the word incorporation is not inappropriate, because what she wanted was to replace people who had died. So not just Albert, by the way, but lots and lots of people. The first instinct she had when someone died was to get a sculptor to make a portrait of them. And you can see this in the portraits of the royal family, most poignantly of all in 1863, when the eldest son gets married, Prince Albert Edward. Prince Albert is in the wedding photographs in the form of a marble bust.
Amazing.
And the space he once occupied has been filled by a work of art. And you can see this happening again and again and again. It's her way of replacing somebody who's gone.
Do I remember you even reporting that she had hands made that she would hold?
Yes, his once he died, but also slightly less worryingly, I think, all those little carved limbs of the young children. And the aim there was to capture a moment in their lives which would never come back. And those of us who are lucky enough to have children, know what she was talking about, because a child's appearance at different ages changes so much. And the weird thing about them is they have to initially be made through casting. And how can you cast a child? If you've got a child who's, let's hope they haven't actually broken their arm, but try taking a plaster cast of a 2-year-old's arm, and they had to do it at night when they're asleep. And then you get an object which is a horrific object, like an actual cast of someone's skin and all the imperfections and pores. It's not a pleasant object. So what then has to happen is it has to be made ideal by the marble carver and made into something which is exactly how I remember it, but totally untrue to nature. And she did that time and again. And of course, if you go to Osborne, I don't think they even put them on display because people are scared of them and think they have to do with death, because marble and death cannot be, that association can never be broken. But they all lived happy lives, relatively so.
And then another extension of this question is were there any figures from the royal family who themselves were quite involved in the creation of sculpture, the study of it?
Yes, well, you mainly find that in the generation after Victoria and Albert in their children. So Princess Louise, quite well known to have been a student of sculpture in South Kensington, but also the eldest child, Vicky, the future Empress of Germany, and Princess Alice. All 3 of those took lessons in sculpture and made works of their own, which are really considerable. And so, and particularly in the portraiture, you find them, perhaps under the influence of their father. Prince Albert would stand next to a modeler and get a tool and start removing bits. When John Francis was making a bust of his father, he would just take up the sort of scalpel and start removing bits. And both Vicky, Alice, and Louise all did that. Quite what the artist would have thought, I don't know, but they were,
Wonderful. I'm just encouraging people in the audience, if you have questions for us, please do type them in the chat. I don't see anything yet coming in. So we'll just carry on for a few more questions at least. We don't have to keep Jonathan here forever. But Greg, did you want to pick up on anything?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, Jonathan, through your work on this over so much time, were there new attributions or identifications or surprises that came about through your looking into these objects?
Well, there was one we just mentioned. The young, relatively young, what she was called Crown Princess of Germany, made this portrait bust of her father. And until about 5 years ago, nobody thought it existed. But there it was. It had been standing in the hall at Windsor for 150 years in marble and attributed to another sculptor. Everybody knows this. Works of art don't come with a kind of barcode, or they don't tell you who they are. I've had a wonderful curator called Sally Goodser working with me, and we've both made discoveries where we've recognized a likeness suddenly, and it can be a wonderful moment when something's got the wrong name on it, and you say, I don't think that's them, and then you realize. And so, there's a bust of Duke Wilhelm IV of Bavaria, which is newly identified. There's Napoleon's own bust of the Duke of Marlborough. Of course, there's that Cellini. There's new work by Reisbrach, Soldani. Who else have we got? Carlo di Cesare. All sorts of interesting new attributions. But I find that when you have an unknown person and then you discover it's somebody completely different, often even more interesting.
Yeah.
Sally identified a bust as that of Michael Costa, the first conductor to use a baton in England. And there's a wonderful story there. But unknown man is no longer his fate. And it is the biggest irony of a marble bust, which, if it's created for anything, must be to immortalize somebody, being anonymous.
Yeah.
What an irony. And it is a great thing to be able to put the occasional name, even though one still sometimes has an unknown artist with it.
Yeah. I had one more question on my end that I wanted to come back to, and I was very struck. Actually, before I ask that, I just want to ask one other quick follow-up, which was, if I understood, the two Cellini bronzes, one is in the collection now, but the other was at some point purchased presumably by the Getty. Are there lots of known examples of the ones that got away, and how do you deal with those?
Well, that's a really good question. Yeah. Yes, it's true of the Royal Collection as a whole that really there's almost as much out there as there is still within, particularly after the 1650 sales. If it hadn't been for those, this would be a different order of catalogue. I would say that the first 100 pages of it would beat any museum if you put me up against them, but there have been these heavy losses. Now, there are also things that I can't find that I know were once there. Somebody, a colleague said, well, why don't you have a list at the back of all the things you know were once in the Royal Collection and you don't know where they are now? And I'm afraid I've resisted doing that for the simple reason that for the next 5 years, the trade would be absolutely bursting with objects identifiable as the missing bronze from the Royal Collection. But yes, museum collections around the world have works of art. The famous perfume burner in the Lehman collection in New York, I found in an inventory in, well, we know it was sold to Lehman by George V. This bronze, the Cellini, we just don't know when that left. Sometime after 1875. But yes, of course, it's that sort of collection. Things have come and gone, and things have been given away sometimes.
Yeah, fair enough. So back to the question that I was going to finish with on my end, which was, a phrase you used, if I understood, which was about you described it as an inhabited collection or even a kind of habitat. And I thought that was quite a striking way to put it. And I wonder if it's a different kind of habitation than other media or other parts of the Royal Collection. What is it that makes it a especially habitable or inhabited collection?
Well, I think that it's because bronzes and, as I said earlier, marble busts are recessive. They have their backs to the wall. They line the way. So
Yeah,
in a room like that, you will walk into that drawing room,
yeah,
and you will, if there's nobody there that you need to be bowing to or doing anything else, you will look at the paintings because that you're taught to look at paintings because those are
yes,
works of art.
yes,
What's on the bookcases all around you, even though it's 10 times better than the paintings, you're not going to look at as you would in an art gallery at all, because it's just not that sort of space.
yeah,
But they're doing a job in supporting, what Henry VIII called surrounding the sovereign with magnificence. That's what it's about. But
yeah.
they're certainly not regarded in anything like the same way.
Is this partly why, this series started 100 years ago, why sculpture hasn't been done until now?
That's one of my theories. I think it's also practically a thing where you can sit. Now, I know that people are going to react very violently. You can sit with a box of drawings and sort of do one and then the next one. Now, I know it's not like that because you have to go and look at other drawings and other collections and so on. But it is, on one level, a more simple process with a box of drawings than it is with a thing up a mountain in Scotland and another one on the Isle of Wight, which have to be on the same page.
That seems to me the perfect observation to end on. I haven't got any pressing questions from our audience. I'm sure they're dying to get the book itself. I don't have. I should have taken an image of that code. You don't have it handy, do you? I can
Well,
type it into the
it's going to
chat.
go back to my inability to share my screen properly. But if I go to that one, I can do it now.
Oh yes, that'll work. Now, if you go all the way to the end.
To the end, and I'm going to leave it there for you all.
Yeah, I think it would be good to have this up for people.
Get a quick reprise.
Yeah. There we go.
Afraid it's rather long.
Well, it was terrific. Thank you very much for sharing everything you did. It was a really wonderful sneak preview, as I said.
We're nearly there. I'm sorry, everybody.
That's all right.
But if you are interested in having it, this will be worth your while.
Absolutely.
When we get there.
Absolutely.
There we are. If we stop there, and then I do that.
Got it. Yes, we got it.
Oh, God, what happened there?
Oh, yeah, I saw it. It was Y2511, I think.
Well done, Bill.
Y2511. Oh,
there it is again. And that's
correct.
Oh, I got it. Amazing. Amazing.
That works through Yale books.
Does that mean that I've just won a set of the books myself?
Yeah.
No, sadly not. But it's very good of you to do that.
Yeah. No. Thank you. And do go on the Yale University Press website if you're interested and take advantage of this great offer. Otherwise, the book will be available hopefully not too long after the end of September in fine libraries like the one in my very building here at the Warburg Institute. And I'm sure you'll all have opportunities to see it and celebrate it. Jonathan, congratulations on an extraordinary achievement and really an incredible opportunity for us to hear from you about what was involved,
Yes.
which was a lot. So
yes, thank you for your time, Jonathan. And my congratulations as well on this magnum opus. It's an amazing accomplishment, and we look forward to the book coming out in September. The books.
brilliant.
Thank you both and everybody. It's been a pleasure. And yeah,
Great. Good.
Thank you all.
All right. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.